When she touched his hand, a static spark shimmered between them, warm not painful. A man found her in the wreckage. Not just metal and fire, but something alive beneath the ruin. Titanis does not forgive visitors. Its skies never cry, only hiss. The wind carries nothing but static and old regrets. But that night something broke through. Not from the ground below, but from above. Something fell. The tremor came just after dusk. It wasn't an earthquake. Titanus has no faults left to shift. The planet died long ago, but Darian's shelter shook anyway. A low vibration, as if the air itself was briefly crushed. The power blinked. His scanner lit up with a flicker of atmospheric breach. He stood in the doorway, a cup of bitter, recycled brew still warm in his palm. Through the dust and ash-choked horizon, he saw the smoke. A single gray spiral winding upward against a sunless sky. He hesitated, then sighed, pulled on his gear and mounted the crawler. Curiosity was still stronger than the part of him that had chosen exile. The ravine had opened like a scar 2 kilometers from his dome. When he arrived, the crawler lights caught on twisted metal. Not metal exactly. It pulsed in some places, bleeding faint strands of blue light from organic seams. The thing in the cliffside was a ship, or used to be. He climbed closer. The hatch opened by itself. A low hiss, almost like breath. Inside he found her. Slumped against the wall, armor cracked and sparking. Purple skin dulled to ash gray. Strange veins glowed faintly beneath her surface like circuitry or memory. Her helmet had shattered near the base of her skull. But she was breathing. Barely. He knelt beside her, reaching for the medkit. Her hand twitched. He paused. She opened her eyes, red and gold, and too calm. "You are not my war," she rasped. Then she collapsed again. Darian worked like a man possessed. He had treated drones before, fixed mining bots, sealed coolant lines under radiation storms, but nothing like this. Her blood wasn't blood. It was resonance oscillating in rhythm with his breath. She was cooling fast, and the crawler wouldn't survive another round trip without fresh solar charge. So he gambled. He brought her back. The outpost dome sealed behind them. A tiny island of metal and breath inside an ocean of silence. He laid her on the cot beside the greenhouse bay. Lights flickered over her face, outlining features too delicate to belong to something engineered for war. He waited for her to die. Instead, she stabilized. That night, he watched her from the far end of the dome. She slept, or seemed to. Her breathing matched his. Her pulse mirrored it. He thought it was just a coincidence. It wasn't. By the 3rd day, her color had returned. She drank the water he offered, recoiled at nothing. When she opened her eyes, they no longer looked distant. "You healed me," she said on the 4th morning. "You were dying. I couldn't leave you out there." She studied his face. Her expression did not change, but she said softly, "You are alone." "Yes," he answered. "People don't come here unless they want to disappear." "Why did you—" He gave her a smile, the kind that meant nothing and everything. "I was tired of the noise and lies. Titanis is honest. It hates you to your face." "I understand," she said. "I am Aira." "You remembered your name." "No, but it feels like mine." That made him laugh just once. He held out a hand. "Darian." She looked at it, then touched his fingers. The moment she did, a static crackle shimmered between them. Not pain. Something else. Something warm. That night she sat beside him in silence. The storm outside banged against the dome, like a thing trying to be born. Aira watched it through the viewport, then turned. Her hand moved slowly to her abdomen. She stopped. Her face shifted. "Darian," she whispered. "I feel something." He turned to her. "What kind of something?" She didn't speak right away, just pressed her hand deeper, then stared into him with eyes that didn't blink. "There is a rhythm. Not mine. Not yours. New." He laughed nervously. "You sure it's not residual damage from the crash?" "No," she said. "It is growing. It reacts when you are near." He stared at her. "You're not saying—" "I am not supposed to carry life. Not this way. There was no merging, no union. But—" she looked away. "I felt something when you touched me. Not your body. Your intent." Darian stood slowly. "Aira, That's not how human biology works. Nor mine, she said. Darian ran every scan he had. The med console screamed at him. Her cellular structure had changed, slight but measurable. A new waveform had grafted onto her resonant lattice. He found the pulse. Not a fetus, not an embryo, but something alive. Something that carried human protein patterns inside alien resonance scaffolding. The console blinked red, confused. Darian blinked speechless. Era, you're pregnant. She closed her eyes. I know. But we didn't. I know. The silence between them stretched. I didn't mean this, he said quietly. Neither did I, she replied, then softer. But maybe it was meant. Outside, Titanis continued to howl. Snow without snow, a planet without mercy. Inside, two lives stared at each other, and something in between them pulsed warm and silent. Across the dome, the warning light on the satellite dish began to blink. A transmission, intercepted. The language was unmistakable. Elegant, cold. Caliph. They were coming. The transmission wasn't a call for help. It was a scan request masked in passive telemetry. Most would have missed it, but Darian had spent 7 years building counter-surveillance software just to be left alone. That blinking light, it wasn't innocent. Era stood beside him now, eyes fixed on the feed scrolling across his display. They know, she said softly. How? Darian asked, although he already suspected the answer. She pointed toward her chest. The resonance. It leaks. I could not control it when life began. Darian didn't like that phrasing. Not just the implication of being tracked through something intangible, but the way she said life like it was both beautiful and doomed. Then we need to move, he muttered, before they get close. Where will we go? He looked at her, then to the blinking transmission. Somewhere they won't look. The forest. The ancient radioactive forest of Titanis was not marked on any official map. It didn't need to be. Everyone knew to avoid it, not because of monsters, though it had those too, but because nothing that went in ever came out quite the same. Old mining bots sent in the early days came back singing. Drones went silent and returned with completely rewritten protocols requesting parental figures and painting the walls with pollen. Darian wasn't afraid of it. He just respected it. Titanis didn't have many rules, but one of them was, don't mess with what glows by itself. And yet that's exactly where he was heading. Packing took less than an hour. Rations, power cells, a bio-tent with shielding just in case the storms grew worse. Era didn't take weapons, but she moved with purpose. Do you feel it still? He asked her as they sealed the crawler and started toward the tree line. Yes, she said. Life grows fast. Too fast. No, she said after a pause, but fast enough to matter. As they drove, Darian caught glimpses in the distance, shimmering shapes among the trees. Not quite animals, not machines either, echoes of something older. Era stared out the window, her hand over her stomach, not out of fear, but reverence. Why would they hunt on their own? Darian asked. Because it is different. Because it does not ask permission to exist. They crossed the riverbed by dusk. The crawler's shielding held, but the radiation levels flickered past safe margins. Darian hoped the child, whatever it was, didn't mind a little glowing dirt. The forest was alive in ways that defied cataloging. Tree-like things grew in spirals. Vines pulsed with warmth. The air had a weight to it, as if sound itself had mass. They found a cave near the ridge that had been shaped by something more than wind. Symbols had been carved into the walls. Not words. Frequencies frozen in stone. Era paused at the entrance. This place remembers. Darian nodded, too tired to question what that meant. That night he dreamt of stars falling in reverse. He woke to find Ira humming softly. The sound came not from her throat, but from her entire body, a low vibration that settled in his bones. It's growing, she whispered. He sat beside her, watching as faint lines of light moved beneath her skin, like constellations forming in real time. Does it hurt? No, it listens. She wakened to what to you. The next morning things changed again. She moved differently, slower but purposeful. The way she touched her stomach was almost ritualistic now, and her eyes had begun to shift in color, flickering with green and silver tones that weren't there before. Dorian began to notice the effect the child was having on the environment. The air was warmer near Era. Plants leaned toward her. Insects with translucent wings hovered and spun in slow circles before landing gently on her shoulder. Even the strange, luminescent fog that drifted through the forest seemed to avoid her path. "I think it's changing things," he said aloud. She turned toward him. "Not changing, harmonizing." By the fifth day, Darian felt it too. It started when he put his hand near her, not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her core. A gentle buzz settled in his chest, not uncomfortable, almost familiar. The forest accepted them or ignored them. Either way, they were alive, but the peace was thin, the kind that holds just before a storm. It came on the seventh day, the sound of boots on dirt, not human, lighter, too coordinated. Era heard it first. Her hand snapped to Darian's wrist. "They are here!" He moved fast, sealed the tent, scanned the perimeter. 5 readings coming in from the west. "Can you move?" he asked. She stood without hesitation. "Then we go." The escape wasn't clean. Branches cracked beneath them. Something screamed in the canopy above. Not at them. For them. Darian pulled Ira through a narrow split in the rocks where bioluminescent moss glowed like nervous fire. Behind them, shapes moved in shadow, armored, silent, with weapons that hummed low and precise. "Purge unit," Ira hissed. "What do they want? To erase." They ran. The child inside her pulsed harder now. Darian could feel it even without touching her, like a second heartbeat lodged in the air between them. They reached a ridge the crawler abandoned below, but ahead lay the deeper forest, where even the Caliph dared not tread. Era turned to him, eyes blazing. "This is where it begins." And then she stepped into the glow. Darian followed. Behind them, the first beam of energy sliced through the air. It missed by inches, scorching the stone. But the forest didn't like being attacked. The ground shivered. The moss screamed. And the purge squad vanished in light. Darian stared. Era only smiled. "It protects what you listen to." Later, when the storm had passed and the forest had gone quiet again, Darian sat beside her, breath ragged. He didn't understand what they were part of. But the child was no longer just an accident. It was something else. Something the world itself had already chosen. The child should not have been possible. It had no heartbeat in the traditional sense, no blood that could be typed, and no genetic markers that matched anyone's species. It was not a mutation. It was a rhythm, a resonance, a harmonic echo between 2 lives that should never have touched. And yet the life inside Ira pulsed stronger each hour. They had made camp deeper into the glowing forest beneath the roots of something that resembled a tree but hummed like a machine. The air was thick with memory, the leaves, if they could be called, that whispered at the edge of hearing, words without form, sentences that shaped themselves into emotion rather than language. Darian ran his scans again. "This isn't right," he muttered. Era raised an eyebrow, brushing her hand across her stomach where a faint golden light shimmered beneath her skin. "What is not right?" "The energy signature. It's evolving. Last night it was barely measurable. Now it's stabilizing into a pattern. Something active, like it's thinking." Era looked up at the ceiling of woven roots. "It is thinking. It dreams when I sleep. It mimics your words when you speak." Darian froze. "You mean you're hearing it?" "No," she said. "I'm feeling it." He didn't reply, because truthfully, so was he. That night the child pulsed with light, not in Era's body but around it. Darian had woken in a cold sweat, heart pounding. He reached for the scanner instinctively, only to drop it when he saw what was happening. The energy field had extended 3 meters outward, wrapping the interior of the biotent like a living cocoon. Its frequency was high but calming. It didn't burn. It vibrated gently like a lullaby transmitted through bone. And at its center, Era sat cross-legged, her eyes closed, face relaxed. Darian approached slowly. The moment he stepped into the field, he felt it. It wasn't light. It wasn't hot. It was understanding. A wave of emotion, foreign but familiar. As if someone who had never seen a sun had suddenly remembered its warmth. He heard no voice. but he knew what it meant. I know you, and more than that, I trust you. He backed out of the field, breath shaking. The child had recognized him. The next morning, the energy field had vanished, but Era looked different. Not physically, not obviously, but something in her gaze had deepened. She wasn't just carrying something unknown. She was protecting someone who already knew how to feel. "It's aware," Darian whispered as he poured water into a heating coil. Era nodded. "And it is learning fast. Too fast." She looked at him carefully. "You fear it. I fear what they'll do to it." He didn't say what he was thinking, that he feared what it might become too. But that fear was hollow, not rooted in logic, more like awe dressed as anxiety. It was that same day the readings changed again. The child wasn't just evolving, it was expanding its range. Devices nearby began behaving strangely. The water heater boiled before activation. The medkit lights blinked out Morse code patterns without prompt. Even Darian's personal data pad opened by itself and began to scroll, highlighting fragments of old technical documents as if being reviewed. Era touched one of the blinking consoles. "It wants to understand you," she said. "Why? Because you are its anchor." "I didn't ask to be. Neither did I." They both fell silent, not in resentment, but in recognition. Whatever this child was, they were no longer its creators. They were its witnesses. The real proof came when Darian attempted to shut down the camp for relocation. The lights refused to turn off, not out of malfunction. The system worked. The signal was accepted. But then the power would blink back on again, softly, gently, like a child refusing to close its eyes during a story. "Era," he called. "I think it's playing." She stepped beside him and placed her hand on the tent wall. The glow softened immediately. "You must ask for it," she said. Darian stared at her. "You're serious?" She nodded. "It responds to intent." So he cleared his mind, slowed his breath, and spoke not to the tent, not to Era, but to the presence behind it all. "We need to go. Please." The lights dimmed. The camp shut down. He exhaled in stunned silence. "You weren't kidding." Era smiled faintly. "It listens, but only to what is true." Later, as they crossed another threshold deeper into the forest, they found a creature that should have been extinct. It was something like a stag if a stag had crystalline antlers and skin made of living bark. It stepped from the mist and stood before Era. Darian raised his arm, instinctively protective. But the child pulsed once, a soft note that rang through the clearing, and the creature bowed. It bent its neck, touched its antlers to the ground, then turned and vanished into the forest. Era's voice was low. "It knows what that we carry, something sacred." Darian shook his head. "This is madness. You know that, right?" "Yes." And she said it like that made it even more important. That night, as the wind howled through the ancient trees and the stars above blinked behind shifting auroras, Darian sat alone beside the embers of a low fire. Era was asleep, a soft golden hue still pulsing beneath her skin, and all around them the world watched, not in malice, not even in wonder, but in preparation. Something was coming, and Darian could no longer deny it. They weren't just carrying a new life. They were part of an event, a ripple in the rules of reality, and someone out there was going to try to stop it. He looked down at his hands. He had once built war machines. Now he might have to destroy them, to protect something he didn't understand, but already loved. It came with the wind, not a gust but a pattern, a vibration that traveled before sound, a quiet hum that set the trees whispering and the ground trembling in slow intervals. Darian was already awake when it reached them. Era opened her eyes at the same moment. Neither spoke, because they both understood. The Pure Front had arrived. They moved like shadows dressed in Calith armor that shimmered against detection scans. Darian could see them on the portable sensors. 8 figures, closing in. Their formation was surgical, their pace calm. These weren't scouts. These were executioners. Era stood steady and quiet. The child's glow pulsed within her like a lantern trapped beneath skin. It wasn't frantic. It was listening. "We cannot outrun them," she said calmly. "Then we outthink them," Darian replied. But he wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The trees were alive with tension. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The Caliph purifiers did not speak when they arrived. They simply appeared sliding between the trees like fluid war ghosts. Their leader stepped forward, helmet retracting with a hiss. Her face was as smooth and pale as polished stone. No warmth, no kindness, only purpose. Subject Era Thalor, she said. You have violated Article 9 of the Caliph Genome Purity Directive. Era did not flinch. The directive is flawed. You carry contaminated code. I carry life. It is not sanctioned. It is not yours to sanction. Darian felt it before he saw the subtle shift in their stances. The decision had already been made. This wasn't a tribunal. It was an erasure. Then the leader turned her gaze on Darian. Her eyes narrowed. Human. That's me, he said, trying not to sound as tired as he felt. You are complicit in genetic corruption. Do you deny it? He stepped forward, placing himself just a little closer to Era. I didn't even get a choice. Then you will not receive one now. The first weapon charged. It was not a projectile. The Caliph used harmonic dissonance, a form of energy that destabilized living resonance patterns. The effect would tear Era and the child apart on a molecular level. Darian had no plan, just instinct. He moved to block the beam, but it never fired, because the forest responded first. The roots beneath their feet erupted in a flash of light and stone. One of the purifiers was dragged screaming into the ground. The others stumbled, recalibrating. Vines humming with energy surged upward and wrapped around their arms and legs. The entire clearing transformed into a living defense. Era stood still, her eyes glowing brighter than before. The forest is not yours to command, she said. The leader snarled, her voice losing composure for the first time. You've turned yourself into an anomaly. No, Era replied. I've become what we always feared. More purifiers arrived, a second wave, larger, faster. They came down on repulsor skiffs that glided just above the ground. The forest held them back for a moment, but only for a moment. Darian grabbed Era's hand. We have to move. She shook her head. They will follow until it ends. So we end it. The child pulsed again. This time the wave of resonance was visible. It rippled outward like sound turned into wind. Every being in the clearing froze. The skiffs shut down. Weapons powered off. Even the trees seemed to lean in, listening. The leader stared at the glow from Ira's body. It has already begun, she whispered. They fought anyway. Not with elegance, not with restraint. The purifiers surged forward, blades humming with dissonance. Darian moved without thinking. His old instincts took over, duck roll strike. But he wasn't a soldier, not anymore. One of the purifiers knocked him down. His visor cracked. Light exploded behind his eyes. And then, silence. He blinked through blood. Era stood above him, her hands outstretched. She wasn't glowing anymore. She was blazing. The resonance around her had formed a barrier, a living shield of pulsating energy that absorbed every strike, every blast. Her voice rose, not loud but steady. This is not a mutation. This is our evolution. The purifiers hesitated. For one brief second, their rigid ideology faltered, and into that hesitation stepped another. From the tree line emerged a figure unlike the rest. Older, robed, not armored, skin etched with bioluminescent sigils. A staff in one hand, its head carved like a tuning fork. The others stopped moving. Even the purifiers fell back. The figure stepped into the clearing, eyes fixed on Era and the light pulsing from her chest. Darian didn't know who he was, but Era did. Theranil, she breathed. The old one nodded. His voice was music bent into words. The child has come. The leader of the purifiers turned, fury breaking through her calm. You do not have authority here, elder. Theranil raised his staff. I do not need it. I have a memory. This is blasphemy. This is prophecy. He stepped closer to Era, then knelt. To the child, to what had not yet been born. The embodied one has returned. And the forest in agreement exhaled. Afterward, the purifiers did not retreat, but they did not attack again. Their leader stood in rigid silence as Theranil approached her. The world has changed, he said. The council will not accept this. Then the council must be reborn. She stared at him, then at Era, then turned without a word, disappearing into the trees, with the others following like shadows. Only Darian, Ara, and Theranil remained. Darian sat on a rock, bleeding slightly, still not sure what part of this made sense. He looked up at Ara. "You okay?" She nodded. "I think I know now what it is." Theranil turned to him. "And do you?" Darian met his gaze. "Not even close." But deep inside him, beneath the ache and fear, something pulsed in time with the child. A signal, not of blood, but of belonging. The next morning the forest felt quiet, not silent but soothed, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath and decided for now to wait. Dew formed on leaves that shimmered like glass. Insects with wings like prisms hovered near the tent. The soil beneath their feet hummed with an energy that felt neither natural nor mechanical, but something in between. Darian didn't trust it. Era, however, seemed calmer than she had been in days. Her hand rested on her belly, her fingers glowing faintly where they touched. The child no longer hid its presence. It radiated like a sun beneath her skin. Theranil stood nearby, leaning on his staff like a monument older than history. "We must reach the core," he said, his voice like the memory of a song. Darian raised an eyebrow. "Core of what?" "The heart of Zareth." "Is that some kind of relic?" "Not a relic," Theranil replied. "A question buried in stone, one that has waited for a child with two songs in their blood." Darian folded his arms. "And let me guess, that child is ours." "Not yours," Theranil corrected gently, "but through you it came, and through it something very old will wake." It wasn't a choice, not really. The forest opened its paths for them, routes that hadn't existed before. Stone bridges where no water flowed, trees that bent aside without breaking. It was as if the world was preparing. "How far is this heart of Zareth?" Darian asked. "A day's walk, maybe two, if it wishes to be found." "You speak like it's alive." "It remembers. That is enough." The journey was slow. Era moved with grace, but her energy was changing. Not weaker, but deeper, focused inward. Darian watched her every step. Not because he didn't trust her, but because something in him had shifted. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He belonged near her. At midday they reached a clearing where the sun filtered through the clouds and painted the ground in shifting beams. In the center stood a formation of stones, smooth and black, forming a half circle around a pit of pale sand. Theranil stopped. "This is the outer gate." "I don't see a door," Darian said. "You don't need one." He turned to Ira. "It will respond to your child." She stepped forward slowly, then knelt, her hands pressed to the sand. The moment she touched it, the sand vibrated. A low tone echoed across the clearing, deep and slow. The stones lit up one by one, humming in resonance. The ground beneath them cracked. A spiral of light opened below, leading into darkness. Darian swore under his breath. "Are you sure this isn't a trap?" Theranil smiled faintly. "Only if you fear answers." The descent was gentle at first, then steep. The path became narrow, the walls of the tunnel pulsing with faint bioluminescence. Symbols crawled along the surface, shifting slowly like ink in water. Era led the way, her steps light despite her condition. The glow from within her pulsed in time with the walls. Darian followed, one hand on the scanner, the other close to Era. He didn't know if he could protect her down here, but he would try. Theranil brought up the rear, his staff ringing softly against the stone. Finally, they emerged into a chamber. It wasn't large, but it felt infinite. The walls were made of glass that wasn't glass, reflecting every movement, but in a time delay, as if showing echoes from other moments. At the center stood a pedestal, and above it a suspended orb of fractured crystal, rotating without motion. "This is it," Theranil said. "The heart." "Yes." Darian stepped closer. The scanner in his hand went dark. "Dead." Era approached the orb. Approached. The child inside her pulsed once, and the orb answered. The entire chamber lit up, not with light but with memory. The walls shimmered with images. Old wars. Beings of every shape and size. A galaxy bathed in flame. Then another image, a cradle. A seed in space. A child holding the hands of two different species. Darian stood frozen. "That's the purpose of the heart," Theranil said. "To remind us that war is not our only rhythm." Era placed her hand on the pedestal. The orb flickered. A voice echoed through the chamber. Not hers, not Darian's, but somehow both. I am not an anomaly. I am balanced. The voice came from the child. It wasn't born, not yet, and yet it spoke, not in words but in will. The pedestal responded. Its base split open, revealing a slow cascade of radiant dust. Within it, a lattice part machine part bone rose upward. This was fail-safe, Therinil whispered, designed by the first species to unify their worlds. But it would only activate when life beyond law was born. Darian stepped back, overwhelmed. You mean this whole thing? I was waiting, yes, for our child. For any child who could bridge the divide. Yours is simply the first. Era's body shook slightly, but not from pain, from response. The resonance within her was not hers anymore. It was shared. Darian stepped forward, holding her shoulders as the energy rose around them. The child was reaching, touching the lattice, and the heart of Zareth responded. Its light wrapped around them a ribbon of color that hummed softly with memory. Darian saw flashes, Titanis as it once was, Era as a girl, her people singing through crystals. Himself alone, forgotten on earth, whispering to stars he thought didn't care. And now, this, not destiny, but choice. They had chosen to protect each other, and in doing so had changed the rules. The chamber quieted, the light dimmed. Era fell to her knees, breathing hard. It knows, she said. What does? Darian asked. The heart, the galaxy. It knows the child is real. And what does that mean? She looked up at him. It means we can't go back. They exited the chamber in silence. The spiral closed behind them. The clearing felt different, not because it had changed, but because they had. Therinil bowed slightly to Era. The world has begun to shift. Then we must find a place for it to grow, she said. Darian nodded, glancing upward. But he already knew. The stars were listening now. The rain came on the day Lior was born. Titanis did not usually weep. Its storms were violent, sharp, and cruel. But this was different. It fell slow, soft, like a world sighing after holding its breath for too long. They had taken shelter in a hollow tree larger than a cathedral. Its interior pulsed with warmth and filtered light, responding to Era's presence like a living womb. Darian had wrapped the inner chamber with insulation, though he doubted it mattered. The forest itself had become a cocoon. Era lay on a bed of moss that glowed with a steady golden hue. She was calm. Her breath was slow, her fingers tracing the edges of her abdomen where light now flowed like veins of lava beneath her skin. Therinil stood watch at the entrance, silent staff in hand. He did not speak. He did not interfere. Lior was coming. Darian knelt beside her, trying not to panic. He had read every med manual he could download. None of them had prepared him for this. Are you in pain? Era shook her head slowly. Not pain, pressure. Like the universe leaning in. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Are you sure you can do this? Her eyes flicked to his, golden, with a faint shimmer. We already have. And then the light inside her pulsed. The tree brightened. Every vein of energy in the chamber responded, glowing in waves. The moss under her back lifted slightly, cradling her, holding her gently. Then came the sound. A low tone. Not a scream, not a cry, but a frequency so pure it made Darian forget to breathe. Era arched her back. Her lips parted, but no words came. The light surged once more. And then, as if the storm outside had exhaled, it was done. A glow hovered between her arms. Not a child in the traditional sense. A being. Small, soft skin with translucent lines of light across its body. Eyes shut. Chest rising and falling with a rhythm that hummed through the room. Lior. Darian stared, hands trembling. Is it alive? Era didn't answer. She was crying. Silently. Tears that sparkled like liquid crystal. Lior opened their eyes. Not human. Not Caliph. Both. And more. The child did not cry. Instead, they looked directly at Darian, and a soft wave of warmth pressed into his chest. Not words, not even thoughts. Just a presence, like being seen fully for the first time. He collapsed to his knees. I think they just said hello. Era smiled. They know who you are. Therinil entered slowly. The child turned to look at him, and for a moment the old priest froze. Then he bowed. Low, deep, reverent. The embodied one walks, Darian finally spoke, still struggling to accept the stillness that followed. That's, that's not how birth is supposed to go. Ira looked up at him. Nothing about this is how it's supposed to go. She held Lior close. Their light faded slightly, sinking into her arms like a melody being absorbed. Darian sat beside them. He reached out to touch Lior's hand. The moment their skin met, the world shifted again. Not visually, not physically, emotionally. He felt everything. The cold of Titanis, the fire of the heart of Zareth, the silence of the dome. Era's first breath after the crash, his own despair when he thought he'd die alone. All of it shared in a second. Lior had no words, but they had language, the language of presence. Darian pulled back, heart pounding. They're not babies. Not in the way we understand, Era whispered, but they are still children. And we are their parents. Chosen, not assigned. He nodded slowly. I'll take that. Outside, the rain thickened. But it didn't drown the forest, it fed it. The roots grew wider, the air is warmer. The entire region pulsed with something that felt like awakening. Somewhere beyond, sensors from orbit detected an anomaly, a heat signature with no known source, a power field registering both organic and technological harmonics. A report was sent to Velra, the Pure Front commander. She stared at the transmission in silence. Resonance signature confirmed. Hybrid birth achieved. Authorization for escalation granted. She turned to her officers. Prepare for deployment. Back in the forest, Darian and Era had fallen asleep, curled around Lior. Theranil stood guard once again. But now something has changed. The trees bowed slightly as the child breathed. Moss grew brighter where Lior touched it. A nearby pond began to ripple in perfect circles, as if listening to a song only it could hear. Lior did not cry that night. Instead, they hummed. A note so soft it could only be felt through the chest. And in that note, Darian dreamed of Earth. Not the broken cities or the wars that drove him away, but of holding hands with someone different and finding peace in difference. When morning came, Lior was already awake, standing, not walking, floating just inches off the moss. They smiled at Darian, and in his heart he heard a word, Father. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be, because some things don't require explanation. They only require love. Far above, engines roared to life. Velra's fleet had launched. They had declared it an abomination. But Darian knew better. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And it was just beginning. The forest grew quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the silence before a collapse, the space between heartbeats when a predator watches and waits. Darian felt it in his bones before he saw it on the scanners. The atmosphere had shifted. The local fauna, once curious and fearless around Lior, had vanished into the foliage. Only the wind remained, and even it seemed to carry a warning. Lior stood in the center of the grove, arms slightly raised, their feet still not touching the ground. Light shimmered beneath their skin, less intense than at birth but more focused. Darian couldn't shake the feeling that Lior wasn't just growing, they were listening. Constantly. What are they doing? He whispered. Era stood beside him, expression unreadable. Aligning. With what, when, or everything? They had tried to move further west toward the old ridge where signal interference might mask them, but Lior refused. Not by tantrum, not by tears, by stillness. Whenever they tried to leave, Lior's glow would intensify until their environment began to shift, vines curling in retreat. Moss blackening, the sky itself dimming as if mourning. Theranil called it a resonant rejection. The child belongs here, he said, until the moment comes. Darian shook his head. Moment you keep speaking in riddles. Because the truth must be felt, not spoken. Darian gave him a look that said, I'm too tired for mysticism today. Still, he didn't argue, because deep down he could feel it too. Velra's forces arrived without fanfare. No warning shot, no demand, no negotiation. The first sign was a darkening sky, not natural but forced, generated by jamming fields and atmospheric clamps. Then came the shadows of dropships slicing through the clouds, forming a silent blockade above the tree line. Darian watched them from the canopy outpost, hands clenched, breath thin. They're here. Era didn't flinch. She simply stood, arms at her sides, face turned upward. Then let them come. The pure front had not come to capture. They came to erase. Velra walked at the front of her vanguard, armor darkened with ceremonial black, her head bare. Her eyes, unlike her soldiers, were filled not with hatred, but conviction, the kind that makes compromise impossible. She stepped into the clearing without hesitation, flanked by sentries and drones. They saw the child, they saw the glow, and they saw the future they feared. "You gave birth to a lie," Velra said. Era answered with steady calm. "I gave birth to the truth. You're just afraid of what it reveals." Velra's voice was sharp. "You broke the chain, violated every principle our species has stood for. You mingled sacred resonance with noise." Darian stepped forward. "Call it what you want, but this isn't an accident, it's evolution." Velra's gaze locked onto him. "And what does a human know of evolution?" "I know that the strongest species aren't the ones who isolate themselves. They're the ones who adapt." "Enough!" She raised her hand. The soldiers leveled their weapons. Lior looked at them and tilted their heads slightly. Not frightened, not angry, curious. And then the ground shook, not violently, but purposefully. Roots broke the surface like fingers gripping for air. Vines slid from trees, weaving themselves into shields in front of Era and Darian. The moss beneath their feet thickened into a radiant green carpet that pulsed with each of Lior's heartbeats. One of the soldiers tried to fire. His weapon jammed. Another pulled a blade. The blade melted. Lior stepped forward, still glowing, still silent, and every drone in the air dropped from the sky like swatted insects. Darian stared, eyes wide. "What just happened?" Theranil whispered behind him. The child resonated. They didn't destroy anything. They simply silenced it. Velra did not retreat. She pulled a small device from her belt, shaped like a broken prism. "This," she said, holding it high, "is the final measure. Designed by the old priest before they were corrupted by sentiment, a weapon that targets impurity at the molecular frequency." Era narrowed her eyes. "You would use that on a child. This is not a child. This is a deviation, the beginning of extinction." Darian stepped between them. "No, this is what your extinction fear looks like, something you can't control." Velra activated the prism. A ripple of dark energy surged from the device straight toward Lior, and Lior raised their hand. No shield, no counterstrike, just understanding. The energy hit, but it didn't explode. It dissolved. Lior stepped through it as if it were fog. The prism cracked in Velra's hand. Then for the first time the child spoke. Their voices were soft, not male, not female, something more elemental. "I am not your fear, I am your future." The soldiers hesitated. Their weapons faltered. Some turned and stepped back. Velra looked at her forces, at the prism dust in her palm, and something in her stance broke. Not her pride, but her certainty. "You," she whispered, "you were never supposed to exist." Lior approached slowly. "No one is, until they do." Velra fell silent. Lior stopped just short of her, then reached out and touched her hand. Velra didn't resist. A glow passed between them, barely visible, like a memory being shared. And for a heartbeat she saw her childhood in the resonance temples, the loneliness of purity, the silence of obedience, and then the warmth of connection, the possibility of being more than just correct, of being whole. Her lips trembled, then she stepped back. "I cannot follow you," she said, "but I will not stop you." She turned. I walked back into the trees, alone. Her army did not follow, because the war had already ended. It just hadn't realized it yet. That night the forest breathed easy. The sky cleared. Lior slept between Era and Darian, curled like a star, cradled by two worlds. And for the first time since Titanis had burned under starlight, it rained again. Not ash, not acid, but water, the kind that makes things grow. The next morning Darian didn't wake to silence, he woke to singing. It wasn't human. It wasn't Caliph either. It came from the trees, the moss, the air itself. A soft harmony, as if the forest had learned a melody overnight. Each note was low and steady, repeating in a cycle that wrapped around the dome of the world, like a lullaby meant not for sleep but for becoming. Lear stood at the center of the grove, arms slightly raised, light glowing from the soles of their feet up through their spine. The glow wasn't wild anymore. It was refined, controlled, chosen. Era knelt nearby, her hand resting on the ground, eyes closed. Theranil whispered, "They are speaking to the world." Darian rubbed his eyes, his voice hoarse. How can the world hear anything through resonance? Everything vibrates, even love. By noon, the air had changed, not just in temperature or pressure, but in feeling. Other creatures arrived at the grove. They came slowly, quietly, in pairs and small clusters. Not human, not Caliph. Some were silicon-based, some gelatinous, others floating a few inches above the moss, casting shadows without bodies. None of them approached me directly. They stayed at the edge of the clearing watching. Darian counted over 30 species he didn't recognize. "Where are they coming from?" he asked. Theranil answered. "They heard the child. But we didn't send a signal." "Yes, we did." Leor opened their eyes and spoke. "I am not alone." The words didn't travel through air. They reached the mind first. A message that skipped the ears and landed directly behind the heart. A sense of belonging, not demanded, but offered. One of the beings, a tall creature like glass shaped into a cloak, stepped forward. It bowed. Then it simply waited. Leor stepped toward it, raising a hand. They touched, and the glass creature glowed. Its core shifted from pale white to a soft blue. It nodded, then turned and walked back into the forest. Another being stepped forward, then another. One by one they came, and Leor accepted each touch, each resonance, each bond. Darian stood in stunned silence. "They're syncing with everything," he whispered. Era smiled. "Yes, because they are everything." From orbit, the event was impossible to ignore. Sensors registered it as a cascading biosynchronization event. Planetary frequencies began to stabilize. Heat signatures, once believed to be random, began forming patterns around a single central point. Leor. Back on the surface, a subtle shift began in the grove. The trees started bending, not away, but toward the child. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in decades opened in radiant bursts. Creatures made of crystal, bark, metal, and bone gathered at the edges and simply stood, watching, waiting. Theranil raised his staff and tapped it once against the ground. "This is the beginning of what we feared and hoped." Era stood beside him. "They will not understand it. They will try to stop it." Darian glanced between them. Try to stop what exactly? Theranil turned to him. The rewriting of life's language. Before he could question further, a blinding beam of light streaked through the sky. It struck just outside the grove. Then another, and another. Explosions echoed beyond the trees. Fire bloomed in petals of orange and white. Ships had returned, but not Caliph. Council ships. The Galactic Council. A body meant to govern peace. Now acting without permission. Era's face went cold. They lied. Theranil simply nodded. They feared they were too late. Troops descended, not soldiers, scientists, council, xenobiologists, armored, lightly faces hidden behind chrome masks. They came not with guns, but with sterilizers and genome disruptors. "Contain the field," one barked. "Do not engage the child." "What do you mean, contain?" Darian shouted. They ignored him. One of them activated a suppression array. The field unfolded like a net of frozen light designed to trap resonance and collapse waveform fields. It spun toward Leor. The forest roared. The roots responded first, rising from the earth like spears. The vines wrapped around the array, squeezing until it shattered into fractal shards. The scientists stepped back, panic breaking through their calm. Then Leor raised both hands and spoke again. "I do not want war." The words hit like wind through metal. Several of the council agents fell to their knees. Others stood frozen. One dropped their equipment and wept. Then Leor did something no one expected. They walked forward, toward the enemy, toward the fear, toward the suppression field that was already forming again behind a backup unit. And they touched it. The array didn't break. It turned gold, then dissolved, not in violence, in release. Every machine within 50 meters shut down. Every soldier's mask deactivated. The scanners blinked error after error, then froze on one reading, unknown harmony source. Threat level undefined. Biological classification pending. Era stepped forward and spoke clearly. This is not a mutation. This is the answer. One of the xenobiologists, young terrified, removed their helmet. A woman, pale skin, dark eyes, tears on her cheeks. What? What are they? Darian looked at his child, now standing in the center of a grove full of silence and awe, and he said simply, their hope. Back aboard the council flagship, a dozen analysts reviewed the footage. They argued, shouted, some demanded containment, others begged for classification. One vote was called. It failed. Then another. Then silence. Until one counselor, older than the others, finally whispered, biology must be redefined. And no one spoke after that. Back on Titanis, the forest breathed again. The rain returned, and Lior looked to the stars. Not afraid, not alone, just ready. They did not flee. They waited. When the skies cleared again and the firestorm subsided beyond the ridge, Darian expected another wave of visitors, armed, angry, cowardly in their authority. But no one came. Only silence. And that was louder than thunder. He stood near the ridge, watching the ash settle over the canopy. His hands were dirty, scraped from hours of reinforcing the perimeter, out of habit, not need. The forest didn't require walls anymore, not when it wanted to protect what lived within it. Behind him, Era sat beneath the ancient tree. Lear stood beside her, still glowing, still silent, but not withdrawn. They were waiting for something, or someone. It was midday when the portal opened. A rift in the fabric of the grove, circular and precise. Not magical, engineered. A council gateway stabilized by resonance tech so advanced it looked like a tear in reality. From it stepped four figures. No armor, no weapons. Just robes and data slates. Their skin bore different hues, gray, teal, coral, but their expressions were unified. They were not here to dominate. They were here to witness. Era rose first. Her presence alone caused the newcomers to hesitate. She nodded once, then stepped aside, so Lior could walk forward. The central envoy is a woman with transparent facial patterns and long flowing sensory tendrils instead of hair, spoke first. I am Archivist Velia, representing the Biology Ethics Tribunal of the Galactic Council. Darian narrowed his eyes. Big title. What do you actually do? She offered him a small smile. We determine the boundaries of life. That seems dangerous. Only if we get it wrong. Lior tilted their head. You came to decide if I'm allowed to exist. Velia inhaled sharply. Not exactly. But close, Lior said calmly. No, we came to ask what you are. There was a long pause. Then Lior walked past them, past Darian, past Era, to the edge of the grove. They raised a hand, and with a motion so gentle it barely seemed real, they touched the air. It rippled, not from power, from meaning. In the sky above, lights shimmered, not stars, data, memories, shared across frequency and silence. Stories from the species gathered in orbit. Names of the lost. Patterns of DNA are long extinct, and something more. Hope. Velia stepped forward slowly, entranced. What is this? It's me, Lior said. And them. And you. I don't understand. You don't have to. Darian felt it then. A thrum in the base of his skull. A low resonance like a memory trying to surface. He blinked and saw Earth. Not as it was. As it could be. Clean skies. Children playing with other species. Dirt roads with digital interfaces. Hands held between claws and fingers. He gasped. Was that you? Lior turned and smiled. I only showed what's possible. The envoys fell to one knee. Not in worship, in agreement. Velia looked up, voice shaking. Will you speak to the council? Lior paused. I will sing to them. Sing? Words divide, but the song connects. Back in orbit, the council chambers opened an emergency session. Not because of fear, because of beauty. The entire hall, usually filled with sharp debate, was filled instead with the soft hum of Lior's projection. They sang no lyrics. They spoke no language. But every delegate felt the same thing. Unity, not forced, offered. A vote was held, not by show of hands, by resonance. Each species stepped forward and placed their hand into the prism interface. It glowed, red, blue, then gold, not unanimous, but overwhelming. Resolution 998.7b, the recognition of multilinear resonant life forms. Status ratified. New biological class, embodied resonance. Subclause interference prohibited. Protection mandated. Study permitted with consent. On Titanis, the portal closed. Velia bowed before leaving. You've changed everything. Lior blinked. Everything was already changing. Will you come to the capital? No. Why, this place still needs healing. As the sun dipped low over Titanis, Darian sat beside Ira once more. Lior walked barefoot across moss that grew richer with each step. They were no longer just their child. They were a chapter in the galaxy's story. Darian looked at Ira. Do you think we did the right thing? She smiled softly. I think we were part of something right. Far above, new signals danced between satellites. No warnings, invitations, and in the darkness between stars, life listened. Some with fear, some with wonder, but all with attention, because a child had sung to them, and they had heard. The following days were not peaceful, but they were quiet. The kind of quiet that comes not from absence, but from deep-held breath. Like the galaxy itself was pausing, watching. Darian spent his mornings repairing systems that no longer needed fixing. The forest sustained them now. Energy pulsed through the soil, filtered through vines, humming through the walls of their shelter, like an ever-present lullaby. Lior no longer slept, not in the human sense. They rested in phases, often standing still for hours, eyes half-lidded, swaying faintly, as if dreaming while awake. Ira said it was normal for their kind, or what might be their kind now. One morning, a familiar voice crackled through the comms. It startled Darian so badly he nearly dropped his toolkit. Voss, are you receiving this? This is Captain Emra Kellen of the Neutrality Pact. We have authorization to approach. He scrambled to the transmitter. I'm here. You're actually coming down. A pause, then, we're not here to interfere. We're here to learn. Darian rubbed his face. Well, I hope you brought open minds, and maybe something stronger than coffee. Emra's vessel touched down at dusk, a small ship unarmed, civilian colors. Darian was surprised by how relieved he felt seeing another human face. Emra was older than he remembered, eyes sharper, uniform, less pristine. She stepped out slowly, her crew following behind. The moment she saw Lior, she froze. Is that them? Yes, Darian said. They're more than I can explain. Lior approached, barefoot, hands at their sides. They stopped a few steps from Emra, then smiled. The sky above shimmered briefly. Welcome, they said, and the air vibrated with color. Later that evening, Emra sat with Darian by the fire, cradling a cup of rehydrated tea that now tasted like cinnamon, and starlight, another side effect of Lior's presence. This doesn't feel real, she said. It shouldn't, Darian replied. But here we are. And they really changed the council's vote, didn't change it, he said. They just made it undeniable. Emra stared into the flames. So what now? You build a monument, a religion, a school. No, Era said from nearby. We build a home. Darian nodded. For anyone who doesn't fit the old model. Emra chuckled softly. So, basically everyone. The word spread slowly, but it did spread. One ship became 2, then 5. Scientists, refugees, diplomats, nomads. Families from species with no names in any human database. Some came to worship, others came to argue, all came to witness. Lior welcomed each with the same gesture, a nod, a soft hum, and a question shared in feeling, not words. Do you want to belong? In the weeks that followed, structures rose not of stone or steel, but of living wood and shaped light. Titanis, once a forgotten exile world, began to bloom. The name changed unofficially at first, from Titanis to Elira, a word that meant sanctuary in the old Caliph tongue. Darian watched the community grow with a strange blend of pride and disbelief. One night he asked Era, "Are we ready for this?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "No one is ever ready to change this big." He exhaled. Fair. She reached for his hand. But some of us choose it anyway. Then came the second vote. This time not from fear, but from request. Dozens of species had petitioned the council to allow mixed communities outside their sectoral borders, places where resonance-based life could cohabitate with standard biology without prejudice. The council stalled, debated, argued, until one of their own proposed a compromise. Let the New World speak for itself. A delegation was sent, not just humans, not just Caliph. All of them are different. All of them are tired of walls. They arrived on a lyra with translators, observers, and security, though the latter left their weapons behind upon seeing the grove. Lior greeted them with a single phrase, not spoken, written across the sky in fractal glyphs made of light. We are not anomalies. We are what comes next. Some wept, some kneeled. One ambassador simply said, "This changes everything." Darian watched from a distance, arms crossed, dust on his boots. "You get used to it," he said under his breath. Back at the shelter, Emra and Aira reviewed energy readouts. Theranil meditated with a chorus of stone-skinned monks. Lior sat beneath the tree that had first glowed for them. Above a star pulsed twice, then vanished. Later that night, as Darian sat beside Aira under the stars, he asked, "Do you think they're safe now?" Aira looked at the firelight flickering in Lior's eyes. "No," she said, "but they're seen, and sometimes that's the beginning." Lior was 5, not in Earth years, not in Caliph cycles, but in growth, understanding, and something that sat between instinct and wisdom. They had no traditional age, but even the stars outside the system now marked time with their existence. 5 cycles since birth. 5 since the forest began to change. 5 since Titanis became a lyra. 5 since Darian stopped being alone. And now Lior was ready. The Galactic Summit was not supposed to be a battleground. It was the ceremonial heart of unity, an event hosted once every full rotation of the core spiral, a pause in all known conflicts for leaders, thinkers, and survivors to speak as equals. This year it was different, because this year Lior was invited, officially, publicly, and with that invitation came surveillance, outrage, celebration, and plans. The summit was held on Sorelli's station, a neutral colossus floating between the 3 main sectors. It was made of smooth iron, vast transparent towers, and entire wings dedicated to gravimetrics for different species. Its halls were sacred. Nothing had ever been fired in anger here. Until now. The child walked slowly, flanked by Darian and Aira, who both wore simple robes instead of formal attire. Lior had requested it. "We are not here to impress," they had said. "We are here to remind you." Darian tightened the collar of his borrowed tunic. "Do you ever not sound like a prophet?" Lior smiled. "Do you ever not sound tired?" Aira chuckled softly. "We all play our parts." Theranil waited at the main gate, his staff etched with new marks. His robes were lined with symbols of resonance and unity. He bowed to Lior. "Are you prepared?" "I am becoming," Lior replied. Inside the central hall, hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Ambassadors, militarists, archivists, counselors, even former enemies. All had come to see the hybrid child. Darian kept his face blank, but he felt the tension coiled around every step like a tripwire. They reached the dais. The room dimmed, and then without warning, Lior pulsed. Not visually, energetically. The lights dimmed slightly, then every console flickered once. Some of the council guards shifted nervously. An AI interface blinked and spoke. "Unknown biosignal detected. Compatible with all harmonic ranges. Origin unclassified." Lior spoke, their voice echoing gently, not amplified but simply heard. "I do not speak as Caliph, or human, or an anomaly. I speak as a bridge." Murmurs rippled across the chamber. One delegate, a skeletal figure from the Ironthorn Union, rose. "This creature tampered with sovereign resonance systems on our survey ships. We do not call that a bridge. We call that a weapon." Darian opened his mouth to respond, but Lior raised a hand, and with a slow breath, they turned toward the delegate. "I did not attack you. Then how did every one of our ships shut down when it approached your orbit? Because they listened." Gasps filled the room. Lior took another step forward. "Your technology is based on exclusion, separation of input, defensive signatures." They raised a hand. "I do not separate." And with a single thought, the council chamber shifted. Lights flared, but not violently. Walls folded into luminous geometry, each pane reflecting the faces of those inside. The entire chamber sang. not sound. Resonance. Each being felt their heartbeat align with the next. For one moment, everyone breathed in sync. Then it passed. Silence returned, and no one spoke. Until a voice cracked the stillness. Low, bitter, wounded. It was Commander Velra. She had not spoken since her last encounter on Titanis. She had vanished from public life after the failed purge. Now she stood again older. Eyes lined with regret. "You made me feel something that day." Lior turned. Velra's voice trembled. "I thought it was a shame. Now I think it was grief." "For what?" Lior asked softly. "For what I gave up to follow rules that were already broken." The chamber shifted again, this time not by power, by choice. One by one, delegates stood, not to speak, to listen. And in that stillness, something ancient moved. The heart of Zareth, hidden beneath the crust of a forgotten world, activated, silently, remotely. Responding not to orders but to the field Lior had triggered by simply being, and the galactic emergency system screamed. Core reactivation detected. Energy levels non-hostile. Device classified cosmic weapon. Authorized access level 1. Panic should have followed. Instead, the chamber remained calm, because they felt it. Lior did not glow. They radiated, not light, acceptance. One of the floating archivists spoke gently. "You are the key. I am the echo," Lior corrected. "The key is within every being who learns to harmonize, but only you can unlock it." Lior nodded. "I do not unlock it to rule. I unlock it to end the game." Back on Elira, systems once long dormant awakened. Seedlings formed of old tech and new life burst from the soil, creating spires of light that connected distant species through bioresonant webwork. Not surveillance, not control, communication. A child had been born, not as a weapon, but as a mirror, and the galaxy suddenly and irrevocably saw itself. Not perfect, but possible. Lior stepped down from the dais. No vote was held, none was needed. The summit had witnessed more than words. They had felt the truth, and truth does not require consensus, only courage. Outside, the stars pulsed once, as if blinking awake. The first shot was fired 3 days later, not from a rogue faction, not from a pirate syndicate, but from a coalition military remnant that had refused to attend the summit. They had watched the proceedings from the edge of council space, silent, unmoved. Then they sent a warning: deactivation of weapon systems across our fleet will be treated as a hostile act. No reply was needed, because Lior's very existence was the reply. The resonance field generated after their summit appearance had already spread across 3 sectors. Ships powered by traditional tech found themselves slowed. Targeting systems stuttered. Missile locks failed. Biological shields that are based on emotion-linked defense nodes froze. The galaxy hadn't been disarmed. It was simply stopped fighting. But there were those who could not accept peace, not when it came from something they hadn't authorized, something they couldn't dissect. And so they came, not to Elira, but to the orbit above it. Darian stood at the edge of the new terrace, watching the sky fracture. 30 ships, no banners, no transponders. But Velra recognized them. She had once led them. "They are old," she said quietly, "built for extinction." "Of whom?" Era asked. "Anyone who challenged the order." The ships didn't speak. They formed a wall, a position. Then they waited. Darian gritted his teeth. "This isn't diplomacy. This is an ultimatum." "No," Velra replied, her gaze sharp. "This is panic, and panic she knew was dangerous." The council begged for time. Dozens of messages flooded in, offering mediation, proposing treaties, even threatening sanctions. Lior listened to none of it. They simply stood at the center of the grove of becoming, feet sunk into the moss, eyes closed, waiting. Era sat nearby, silent. Darian paced, restless. "They're not firing yet, because they're afraid," Velra said. "Afraid of Lior, no. Afraid they're already irrelevant." It happened quickly. One ship powered up its primary cannon. The others followed. And then at the apex of targeting, Lior raised their hand. No explosion came. Instead, the sky paused. Satellites halted their rotation. Quantum comms froze in mid-transmission. Across 6 star systems, weapon systems flickered into idle mode. Darien felt it in his bones first. A hum. Deep, subsonic. Leor was speaking again, but not with words, with waveforms. Back on the flagship of the approaching fleet, Admiral Ren Voltan watched in disbelief as his targeting interface turned white. Then gold. Then blank. His second-in-command whispered, "Sir, we're offline. All of us. Yes, across the array. It's not a hack. It's something else." Voltan opened a manual override. It refused to respond. He tried to power down. It refused that too. "Explain this." The comm officer blinked. "Sir, it's not an attack." "Then what is it?" The technician swallowed. A lullaby." On the surface, Leor's body shimmered with threads of color no longer limited to gold and blue. Now hues unknown to standard optics. They had become light translated into emotion. Theranel fell to his knees. "It's begun." Darien grabbed his shoulder. "What's begun? Purification." But it was not destruction. It was correction. The first cruiser stopped mid-flight, its engines deactivated, not disabled, soothed. The second halted its forward momentum and began to drift. The third released its automated drones, which circled in confusion before settling back into their pods like sleeping birds. One by one, each ship responded, not to force, to forgiveness. The sky shimmered. A wave of resonance passed over the fleet, and the soldiers on board felt it, not loss, but release. The old order had not been slain. It had been undone. Down below, Era touched the ground. "Do you feel it?" Darien did. His heartbeat had slowed. His muscles no longer clenched from instinct. He looked around, and even the insects had stopped. Not from fear, from awe. Velra removed her gloves. She stepped into the grove and knelt before Leor. "You've disabled the most dangerous force in this galaxy." Leor opened their eyes. "I did not disable it. I asked." And they listened. They remembered. The council issued a decree that same day. It was short. 12 words, "The war is over. Let those who cannot change step aside." In Illyra, a new gathering formed. Not a government. A circle. No seats. No ranks. Only intent. Each species spoke not in language but in rhythm. A harmony council. Guided by Leor, but led by no one. A week later, the last remaining battleship in orbit broadcast a single sentence. "We no longer understand the enemy. Therefore, we choose to understand ourselves." Then it departed. Its lights dimmed to a peaceful blue. Leor sat with Darien that night, feet dipped into the shallow pond. The stars reflected off their skin. "Did we win?" Darien asked. Leor tilted their head. "No one won. No one had to. And if someone tries again, they won't be met with fear. They'll be met with you." Leor smiled. "No. With us." In the distance across sectors that once tore themselves apart with ideology, a song began. It had no name, but it was instantly recognized. It was the sound of choosing not to fire, the sound of a galaxy daring for the first time to breathe together. The song reached even those who did not wish to hear it. In the scorched remains of the old purity rings buried beneath systems abandoned to history, the last enclaves of isolationist thinkers stirred in their silence. They had not spoken to the council in years, had not transmitted, traded, or taught. But now, as their sensors picked up harmonics spreading across space, they realized something terrifying. They had been forgotten, not through force, but through irrelevance. On Illyra, things bloomed faster than expected. The resonance fields had spread from the grove into the soil, unlocking dormant genetic codes in plants and creatures alike. New species emerged, hybrids, harmonious blends of life that never should have existed side by side. Trees grew that could translate emotion into color. Insects formed spiraling towers of chime-like structures that turned the wind into symphonies. And at the center of it all, Lear simply walked. They no longer needed to speak. When they did, it was for the comfort of others. But most days they communicated through presence, through shared breath, through the soft thrum in the chest that meant connection had been made. Darien had stopped asking what would happen next. He was building again, not machines but homes, structures that flowed with the land instead of against it. Some were for the new arrivals, Others were for the native species that had returned. Elera had become not just a symbol, it had become inhabited hope. Aera had grown quieter, not withdrawn, but settled. She often sat at the edge of the grove, her back against a crystal-bark tree, her eyes closed as she hummed to the earth beneath her. Sometimes Leor would join her. They never spoke. They didn't need to. Theranil spent most of his days among the scholars and children telling stories that were half memory, half song. He said he was no longer a priest. He was now a rememberer, a weaver of what had been into what might be. One morning, Leor approached Darian as he worked. They stood there in silence for a while, watching him attach a curved canopy to the side of a biodome. Finally, Leor asked, "Do you miss Earth?" Darian didn't answer right away. "I miss, the idea of it. The idea that it could have been something more, that we might have fixed it." Leor placed a hand on his arm. "You did?" "Not really. You left." He looked at them. "That was running." "No," Leor said softly. "That was choosing to begin again." Later that day, a delegation arrived, not from a government, from children. They were of many species. Some were born on ships, others in refugee camps, some with no homeworld at all. They brought gifts, paintings, resonance crystals, poems written in joint languages. They had come because they wanted to ask Leor something, not for power, not for answers, but for a story. "Tell us how it started," one child asked. Leor looked at Darian. He shrugged. "You tell it better." So Leor knelt and began. They spoke of the crash, of Aera's pain, of Darian's confusion, of warmth shared not by skin but by intent, of a child born in the forest, of fear then courage, of a galaxy unready then unwilling to return to silence. They spoke gently, slowly, letting the children feel every word in their own way. And when they finished, they said, "And now it's your turn." The children nodded solemnly. Some cried. None forgot. That evening, Leor stood at the edge of the grove, staring up at the stars. New constellations were being named by those on Elira. One of them was shaped like a child, reaching up, their arms open with a burst of light where the heart would be. They called it Resonance Rising. Darian joined them. "You think this peace will last?" Leor didn't answer right away. "Then peace isn't something you keep. It's something you continue. And if someone breaks it," Leor turned to him, "then we remind them of what?" That was the first time someone made a child afraid to exist. They lost everything that mattered. Far away in the halls of the still-standing council, new positions were being written. Ambassadors of harmony, stewards of resonance, titles once impossible. Now it's necessary. And at the top of every charter, carved not in ink but in vibrational code, was a phrase: "Belonging is not granted, it is chosen." Back on Elira, as the wind hummed through singing trees and bioluminescent moss drew shapes under starlight, Darian sat with Ira and Leor at the hearth. No alarms, no plans, just warmth and breath and belonging. It was not the end of the story, but it was the part where they finally rested. The stars had never been so quiet, not in the way silence haunts a room after loss, but in the way a garden falls still at midnight, whole watched over breathing. Above Elira, the constellations shimmered with steady light, no longer pulsing from signal pings or patrol beacons. The warships were gone. The comm-jamming relays had been deactivated. No orbiting weapons platforms waited in shadow. Only satellites now remained, and even they moved slowly, reprogrammed not to defend, but to observe the growing resonance fields across the planetary surface. From orbit, Elira no longer looked like Titanis. Its dull gray crust was gone, replaced with green waves, soft blues, and a radiant shimmer, where the grove of becoming pulsed like a heartbeat. And at its center, the family remained. Darian stood outside their home, not the shelter he had once cobbled together out of desperation, but the living dome that now breathed with the pulse of the land itself. Vines wound through the beams. Crystal growths along the ceiling caught light and refracted it in gentle arcs across the walls. The wind, when it passed through the open arches, carried the scent of renewal, sweet, earthy, and unfamiliar. He watched Leor step barefoot across the moss toward him. "They're arriving soon," Leor said. Darian raised an eyebrow. "The council again." No, the others, the ones who waited. Waited for what? For us to stop fearing what came next. And they came. From across sectors never charted by the old nav maps. Species thought extinct. Civilizations that had left the council before it was even formed. Even wanderers from void-born kinships who had rejected any tie to resonance or gene sharing. Now they came willingly. Not to colonize, not to conquer, but to contribute. They called it the circle of becoming. No charter, no authority, just presence and a promise. Era welcomed them, with gestures instead of rules, with names chosen freely not assigned. She did not explain what Elira stood for. She let them feel it. That night Leor stood atop the summit stone. Their forms still glowed but softer now, less like a flare and more like the sun seen through a calm ocean. They spoke a single sentence, and everyone heard it in their own language, their own rhythm. Even those who had no ears. You are not alone unless you choose to be. There were no cheers, just stillness. And after that, 1,000 stories began again. New ones, shared ones, not bound by lineage or genome, but by listening. In the days that followed, Darian sat at the edge of the pond skipping stones. Leor joined him, older now, not in years, but in presence. "You're not leaving, are you?" Darian asked. Leor shook their heads. "No, but I will not always stay." Darian smiled faintly. "That's cryptic. It's not goodbye, just becoming something more." He nodded quiet. "Then, you still call me father, always. An era, my heart's echo." Darian swallowed hard. "You scare me sometimes." Leor touched his shoulder. "That means you're paying attention." When the wind picked up again, it carried the laughter of children not yet born. The soil underfoot shifted and began to glow in constellations, known only to the grove. Above, a new star appeared, faint but steady. In Elira, life went on, not as it had been, but as it could be, not perfect, but chosen. And in the quiet between breaths, a new galaxy hummed into being, together. We told this story not to claim triumph, but to remember where we began. One human broken and hiding, and one alien warrior wounded and hunted. Neither asked for each other, neither planned for life to grow between them. And yet, through quiet choices and terrifying moments of faith, they carried something new into the world. A child born not of conquest but resonance, not from touch but understanding. Leor was never the hero in the traditional sense. They did not lead armies. They did not fire weapons. What they did was far more dangerous. They invited the galaxy to feel again, to listen, to reconsider the systems built around fear and division. And that invitation, once given, could not be silenced. Elira became the proof that exile could birth a sanctuary, that what was once forbidden could become sacred, that sometimes evolution begins not with a mutation, but with a moment of kindness. I cannot tell you if this peace will last forever, but I can tell you this. It started with a choice to protect a stranger, to believe in a child, to rewrite the rules not with law, but with love. And if there is hope for one world, perhaps there is hope for us all. Because maybe the future doesn't belong to the strongest or the oldest. Maybe it belongs to those who dare to resonate, to connect, to become.